Never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Dr. Dan's Freedom Forum is a call to arms for those American patriots who, in the tradition of our founding fathers, will stand up now to defend the Constitution and the liberties that it guarantees to each citizen, to each of us. That is our mission, to explain in a clear and concise manner the direct effect of each issue on the individual, on you personally, not some anonymous being in a distant place, and to define in no uncertain terms the consequences of inaction. Let the battle begin.
Well, hello, this is Dr. Dan, and most of us living in America today are old enough to have experienced for ourselves the events of the 20th century America, or we're the children of those who did. We have all witnessed a long series of events that have created and nourished the American dream for millions of our fellow citizens. I don't worry about these guys. I don't worry about myself. But I do worry about the generations of younger Americans who have been deliberately denied the knowledge of that history, and worse, have been taught a sanitized or false story to justify an evil agenda. Most of the Americans born after 1990 have no memory of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, no memory of World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iran-Contra crisis, and no personal knowledge of the disastrous failures of fascism, socialism, and the human tragedy imposed by totalitarian dictatorships on their unwilling captive subjects. Most were never taught true American history and true world history, creative writing, math, science, and too many lack the ability to assess facts and reach logical conclusions. The foundation of their knowledge is propaganda, not truth. And therefore, they are easily captivated by Marxism and plans of the United Nations and the wealthy global elite to end America's national sovereignty and institute a one-world totalitarian dictatorship. My guest today is Hannah Faulkner of The Hannah Faulkner Show, which airs on Rumble and other social media sites. Hannah is 17 years old and, like me, a crusader for freedom. As a former national motocross and stock car racer, she is now dedicating her time traveling the country with the goal of mobilizing Americans to stand for truth in our current spiritual battle. Hannah has written a new book about the principles that guide her life and beliefs. It's called Last Chance to Save Our Republic, in which she argues America's problems trace back to America's rejection of God and the Judeo-Christian values that once guided our nation. So, Hannah, thanks for joining me on Dr. Dan's Freedom Forum live podcast. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dan. I know we had a phenomenal, great time digging into all these issues. Last time I was on the show, I really appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate you having me back on.
Well, Hannah, I got to tell you, you have written an incredible book. It's really, when I say incredible, I mean it's incredible, because you discuss the history, the meaning, and the importance of natural law rights, which are rights given us by God, and how faith and morality are the basis for our constitutional republic. So that's really where we're going to have to start right now. We have to be able to talk about your book. So I know you've been active for a long time on social media. You have a lot to say, and you say it very well. I'm really proud of you. So now you've written a book. Why did you decide to write that book?
Yeah, well, my dad actually, because I got involved in politics, which I shared last time I was on the show, I got involved with Turning Point USA, which is a huge organization. I'm sure you and your audience are very familiar with Turning Point and Charlie Kirk. But I got involved with them when I was 13, and then shortly after, I hosted the Teens Against Gender Mutilation rally in 2023. And then the week before that, I was invited by General Flynn to speak at the Reawaken America tour, and things started to take off. I started to do some investigative journalism with libs of TikTok and to expose Planned Parenthood and these trans youth organizations. So I started to do some stuff, started to gain momentum to sharing, my voice and sharing the truth, these common sense issues that we shouldn't even be having to discuss. But unfortunately, because we've rejected God, because we've rejected a level of morality in our society, we're going to have to face them and we're going to have to fight them. So my dad was telling me, he's like, Hannah, like you've hosted these rallies, you're speaking at events, you should take what you've learned and what you've assessed and the research that you've done, you should take it and write a book about it. And I kept telling him, I'm like, listen, I'm not going to start a podcast because that was something else he wanted me to do. It wasn't that he necessarily wanted it. It was more so that he, saw the need for it of the younger generation to do it. And so he's urging me, like encouraging me to do these. And I'm like, Dad, I'm not old enough to write a book. I'm not old enough to, start a podcast. You just don't see it happening. I'm not going to do it. And so he kept, mentioning it to me here and there and say, hey, like this would be a good topic to mention. And so September of 2023, September of 2023, I was like, you know what? I'm going to sit down and I'm going to start writing. And I started writing with the chapter, which is the 5th chapter, The Poison of Gender Ideology, because that issue was something that was the issue that really got me involved. That was the issue that led me to host the Teens Against Gender Mutilation rally and was really just the issue that impacted my generation the most, is what I believed. And so I started researching it. I started writing this chapter and I was blown away by the things that I found and the things that I learned of what is in our history regarding gender ideology, things that you don't hear in textbooks. You don't hear that the first genital mutilation surgery was not it wasn't in 2003, it wasn't in 2020. The first genital mutilation surgery in the United States of America happened in the 60s, in 1960s, at the John Hopkins Hospital through John Money, and the surgery was on a man named Avon Wilson in the 1960s. And so you start learning all these, and you look up, John Money and the Reimer twins, which I'm sure you knew about prior to even reading the book. But the Reimer twins, it's a horrific, devastating story where this young boy, his circumcision did not go well, and something was messed up with the doctors. And the doctor said, the way that you can solve this problem, he told the parents, was to just allow your son to live his life out as a girl. Tell him he's a girl. Never tell him what happened, and just portray him as a girl. So the doctors sent the family to John Money, and John Money says, yep, the best thing that's going to be for your son is just for him to transition into a female and for him to live his life out as a woman. Well, little did they know that he was actually experimenting on the twin boys. He was experimenting. John Money was going to experiment on those boys. And so I started researching all this and learning. And then we move into abortion and move into really just the founding of our country. I mean, that's what I began the book with, is why we left England in the first place. The fact that we are a constitutional republic, we are not a democracy. You hear so often from our leaders and our politicians that we're a democracy and we need to save our democracy, but we're not. And our founders understood that so instrumentally. They orchestrated America to be a constitutional republic on purpose, to be a republic, rep the public, a nation that is represented by we the people, not by these globalist establishment elitist class. But of course, I don't think it's any coincidence that they always say that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, because that's what they want. Because a democracy, once it gets to a certain size, we become peasants to the elitist class. There's a small group of oligarchs that are leading us as the peasants as they see us. So it's very strategic. Everything that's happening, I don't think it's anything it's not a coincidence. So that's what that's really the reason why I wrote the book, is because my dad encouraged me, and I sat down and I started researching and realizing these things are not being talked about on legacy media outlets. Of course, they're being talked about on your show because you've researched, that, if we do not understand our history, we're doomed to repeat it. You don't hear these things in the educational, I say that with quotations around it because these are actually indoctrination camps. So that was really the premise of why I wrote the book and my heart behind Last Chance to Save Our Republic.
Well, you've brought us right away in the beginning, you've discussed some of the most important things you could. I like to think that every time I hear the words "our democracy," I would just like if on whatever news channel, if you, whatever when someone guest said "our democracy," if I were there, I'd go, "Time out. We are not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. A democracy is mob rule, where the will of the majority governs everybody, even if it's just by one vote." And you know that in democracy, a democracy is really a pathway toward a totalitarian government, because that's what eventually happens. If you have a constitutional republic with a Bill of Rights, you have rights. And in our case, they're natural law rights given to us, as you know, by God. When you have a democracy, the governing majority starts to insert things that they call rights, but they're not rights, because inevitably the minority has to pay for providing those rights. And that's when things start to fall apart. Now, the left would certainly like to have a democracy, but you know as well as I do how very dangerous that is to our freedom.
Well, and I'll say this, it really is. It's a shame. It's disgraceful that we have so many politicians right now, even on the right, that really have no idea even what a democracy is. They don't really know even what they're saying. It's coming out of their mouth. I mean, I'm sure if you ask them on the news, okay, so why do you believe America is a democracy? I would have to say there's probably a portion of them that couldn't even determine why we are a constitutional republic or defend why they think that we're a democracy, because they haven't been properly educated. They haven't been informed. We have a lot of ignorant individuals in our country. It's really sad. Now, obviously, I'm very hopeful with this administration, and we'll get into that later, but I do want to mention this because I know there's going to be people watching this, and I know there's people that are reading my book contacting me saying, "Hannah, you say all the time, said in the beginning of your book and throughout that we are a nation founded on biblical principles." Yep, that's right. Last chance to save our republic. I know there's going to be people that say, you say that we're a nation founded on biblical principles. Does that mean that you want a theocracy? And I break this down in the book because our founding fathers understood that in order for any country, in order for any society to thrive, it must be a nation founded on freedom. Well, where is freedom found? Freedom is not found in Saudi Arabia. It's not found in Iran. Those are theocracies. Theocracies based in the religion of Islam. They understood that the only way that people can find freedom is in the Bible, is through Christianity. And so while we are a nation founded on Judeo-Christian principles and values, that's because they understood that in order for there to be true natural law, like you said, which is from rights given to us by God Almighty, in order for this nation to thrive, we had to be a constitutional republic founded upon biblical principles. And people say, well, God, there's nothing about the Bible mentioned in our Constitution. 26% of political quotes from our Constitution come directly out of Scripture. I mean, the three branches of government is based out of the book of Isaiah. John Adams said that our Constitution was created solely for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And these people will say, well, our founding fathers weren't religious. They were deists. They were, they didn't have any faith. The most quoted book from our founding fathers was the Bible. I think that if they were not, religious or men of faith, I don't think they'd be quoting the Bible as their most quoted book, but they did, because they recognize that in order for this country to thrive, it must be a nation founded on biblical principles. And people say, why is this country so great? The United States of America, land of the free, home of the brave. How did we get to that? How did we become the wealthiest nation, holding so much wealth in our country and freedom and prosperity? How did we get there? It's because of the blessings of what has made this country great, and that is biblical principles again. So people will try to throw in the theocracy, but also theocracies also aren't biblical, because there's no freedom within a theocracy. And if you look throughout Scripture, we have free will. We have, Christ. He died on the cross for our sins, and now we can experience eternal life in heaven with Christ if we accept Christ as our Lord and Savior and we repent of our sins. So theocracies, it's not even biblical. And of course, they're going to throw that in our face because they don't even know really what a theocracy is or what the Bible stands on as it pertains to freedom and free will. But I just wanted to mention that because I know there's going to be some liberal that pops or finds this episode with you and me, Dr. Dan, And they're going to mention, oh, well, you just want a theocracy. That's why you say we're founded on biblical principles. But that's not it at all. And if people understand our history, they'll understand that we are not a theocracy. And our founding fathers understood that theocracies never work. And again, it's another form of tyranny, ultimately.
Well, Hannah, that's an incredible point. Is why is the Bible, why is Christianity, the Judeo-Christian principles, why is it so important? It's not so that the government will insist we live by the rules. It's all really about morality. It's about that division between good and evil. You cannot have a government, you cannot have a country that does not understand that some things are inherently evil and some things are moral. That is the most important distinction of having natural rights and having a constitution that was written based on Judeo-Christian principles. It means we should know the difference between right and wrong. We should be teaching that to our kids from the very beginning. That is what makes a government successful. And our founders knew that. They said, you cannot keep this republic unless you know the difference between good and evil, unless you are a moral people who study and know what morality truly is. And all of the things that you talk about in your book, most of them come down to that thing: good versus evil, being a moral people. And when I will throw this one point in, when I'm listening to the opponents of our country, the people who want to destroy our nation, and they say, oh, you just want a theocracy. Most of the time, what they say is only to generate fear. That's what all their lies are about. They don't care about telling the truth. They'll say anything they want as long as it engenders fear. And that's what they're looking for. Is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I mean, even through in the past, like in order for the enemy, and I talk about communism a lot, and I'm very passionate about breaking down Marxism and all these ideologies and these forms of government. But at the end of the day, this is good versus evil, like you said. I mean, Saul Alinsky wrote the 13 Rules for Radicals in the beginning of his book. He acknowledges who he deems as the first radical. He says that's Lucifer, and and you look at this. I mean, Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama all praise Saul Alinsky. They love Saul Alinsky. They praise his writings. And who did Saul Alinsky praise and acknowledge all of his writings to? Again, Lucifer. So this is good versus evil. And I do believe, and I some people say that's conspiracy theory. Like, who came up with the term conspiracy theory? The CIA, who tried to cover up the assassination of JFK. So we're not even going to get into that today. All right, that's a whole nother topic. But they love to, to throw that conspiracy theory idea because they have no substance to come back with. But you look at the writings and the things that they wrote. I mean, this is good versus evil. And I don't even remember where I was getting off to. What was your question again?
No, we were talking about
the whole JFK thing.
About theocracy. I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, you're right, because this is not a theocracy. Yep. However, the Bible is meant to guide us in the direction of good, to understand, yes, there are things that are morally correct and there are things that are morally not correct. And look at all the things we talk about: gender identity. What you raised, this doctor in the 1960s, experimenting with living people to change their outward appearance. We talk about that. I'm a physician, as you know, an eye surgeon, and I went through medical school. I'm very well grounded in science. I've written scientific papers and the like. And I look at things this way when it comes to gender. You are the gender that your DNA says. If you look inside your cell, 99.9% of people, if you have an X and a Y, you are male. If you have an X and an X, you are female. That is in every single cell in your body. You cannot change that. I don't care what appendages you hang off the outer shell. It does not change the basic genetics of every cell in your body. That's just a fact of life.
Yeah, no, exactly. This is the thing I was going to mention. I just remembered it. Because you were mentioning, the fear that they're instilling into Americans, and they've done this successfully for decades upon decades. And you look throughout history, look throughout these history books and in past communist countries, even under the Soviet Union, and even just throughout America. If the Democrats and the communist propaganda machine, I mean, their ultimate goal is to keep Americans, to keep society in a constant state of conflict and chaos. And you look at the World Economic Forum, their panels were going on last week, which I have to mention, I was really, this isn't shocking to me because the legacy media outlets rarely cover anything that's even, remotely important. But this was important. I love President Trump. I absolutely support almost everything he's been doing so far. I don't think there's actually so far, just with his administration, I don't think there's a single thing that I disagree with, other than one thing. We're talking about Liberation Day, January 20th, 2025, Liberation Day for Americans to be able to get back to what our founding fathers intended this country to be, to save this republic. It's exciting times. But then the day after, we saw Larry Ellison, who is he's a part of Oracle, which its first customer was the CIA. And we can get into a lot of this, but that's very scary. I don't know if you remember in September of 2024, Larry Ellison gave this whole little speech at one of his Oracle conferences and talking about how they're going to surveil on American citizens through this digital track and trace surveillance. And they're going to be surveilling Americans at all times through AI and technology. Very, very scary stuff that every American should be paying close attention to. So I don't know if President Trump is, keeping Larry Ellison close to him, keep your enemies closer, as the quote goes. I don't know, but I think we should be very careful with this AI, the artificial intelligence, because, it's great. I know President Trump said this at the World Economic Forum panel that we want to be the leader in artificial intelligence. But if we do not handle this properly, this is going to bite us back in our face. And this is going to bite us really bad if we don't pay attention to what their ultimate goal with artificial intelligence is. And I mean, you've all Noah Harari, the spiritual leader for the globalist puppets at the World Economic Forum. He even said that humanity, human history is almost over. He said that with his own words. And he's like, I'm not talking about necessarily just history, but we're going to be replacing humanoids, as he says, with AI. So they literally, I mean, they are like humanizing these robots, and artificial intelligence is very scary stuff that I think people should be paying attention to. But the World Economic Forum, they mentioned several times last week about we need to make sure that we keep Americans in a constant state of conflict and chaos, because with the election, with the inauguration of President Trump, that's going to put a halter, it's going to kind of put a stop to the globalist agenda, because Trump is against globalism. He said that multiple times, and they're scared. They're on their heels, kind of wondering what they're going to be able to do next. Is it going to be another pandemic? They're planning it right now. They never do something without telling us they're going to do it. So just pay attention for your audience, what these people are saying. But I agree with you. If they can instill fear into Americans, and really the whole world, but specifically Americans, because we're the last country standing, ultimately, if we fall, so will the others. But if they can instill fear, if they can keep this perpetual state of conflict and chaos, then they will successfully get us.
I recently interviewed James Simpson, who wrote a book called Manufactured Crisis. And really, that's what we've been seeing now for decades and decades. If you look back, the things like COVID, for instance, or wars, or anything that you want to, the surveillance, it all goes back to the fact that you have to keep people constantly in crisis in order to do things that they would not ordinarily accept. And so the book that we all read when we were young, of course, was George Orwell's 1984, which I'm sure you've read too. That should be mandatory reading for your generation, because in that book, it foretells every single thing that is going on right now. They took a lesson from Saul Alinsky, of course, but the novel that describes what that society is 1984. Constant wars or threats of wars, of surveillance into your home of every single person, doing their exercise in front of the TV set in 1984. And the other thing, of course, is changing the meaning of words, which is what they do all the time. They take a word that you think you know what it means, and they change the meaning of it. That is what's going on right now. And you've outlined many instances in your book that really discuss these very problems.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the language twisting. That's something big. I mentioned that in I think it's the third chapter. No, it's the second one. Second or third chapter. Anyways, it's in the book.
Silenced and censored. for us
Yes,
to read
Silenced and
into it.
Censored, I mentioned it in that one, and then also in the digital age, talking about the psychological warfare and the ideological subversion that was warned to us by a lot of these, former KGB informants and people that lived through the Soviet Union and recognized how the Soviet Union, Lenin and Stalin were using language twisting, psychological warfare and ideological subversion onto its people to really keep them confused. And Yuri Bensmanov, who I give a quote in at the end of, I think it was the Silenced and Censored chapter, it's in there, and how he believes there's really 4 stages to completely collapse and disintegrate a nation. And the first one is to demoralize, to remove any kind of basis for morality, which is what they've successfully done in the United States of America. Where, I mean, John Adams, again, back to that quote, our Constitution was created for a moral and religious people. It's wholly inadequate to the government of any other. And I really believe, I know this is going to offend a lot of people, but I really believe that the reason why these Democrats, these communist Democrats and these globalists, the reason why they're constantly in a fight with our Constitution, they're not in a fight with us. They're in a fight with our founding documents. They're in a fight with biblical principles. That's what they're fighting with. The reason why they are constantly attacking our Constitution or trying to twist the verbiage is because it was not created for immorality. It was not created for immoral people. And you look at the Democratic Party, they promote crime, homelessness, drug addiction, abortion, death, birth control, climate control, all of these things that literally are not enshrined in our Constitution. I mean, you look at DEI, something that's been a huge talking point the past couple weeks with President Trump, especially within the past couple days, is completely dismantling and abolishing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And while those ideas might sound lovely, that's not what they mean. This is actually division and exclusion. You look at Terrence Williams. I mean, he made a video the other day talking about how, Al Sharpton's over there saying that we need to keep DEI because it's American and it's all about inclusion. He's like, if you truly were diverse, if you truly were inclusive, then why am I, as a black man, banned from having my cousin tea pancakes in Costco? You're not inclusive and you're not diverse. You're not, there's nothing diverse about your movement. It's actually all division and exclusion. So stop with the fear tactics, stop with the manipulation tactics. Let's get to the bottom of this. So, I mean, there's so much happening with the psychological warfare, the subversion that's literally left Americans just confused. They have no idea how to defend their family. And again, it's very strategic, very strategic. This is no coincidence that we're fighting these issues. But I will say this, as I've promoted the book, I've said that the book is for everyone. And while I believe that everyone should read it, I will say, in the writing process, I think you kind of become a little bit numb to the issues. You're just researching and researching. There was lots of late nights up because I was up till like 3 a.m. in the morning because I found all this information that I'm like, why isn't anyone talking about this? And I would just get on these rabbit holes. And so I think I kind of got a little bit numb to the issues. And so I started reading the book again just this past couple weeks. And it hits you like, whoa, like we got to take a step back. Like we just throw out the word 75 million babies murdered in America since Roe versus Wade. It's like that's 75 million babies that we have allowed to be murdered in its own mother's womb in the United States of America. So I think a lot of times, take a step back. I don't think this book is necessarily for all ages. I think 13, 14 up, parents need to use discretion because I lay out in this book these real stuff. This is deep stuff. I mean, my dad was reading out the gender ideology book, or actually I think it was the digital age one, at a dinner, and the dad said, I just need you to stop reading it because this is deep stuff. I mean, I blatantly discuss what happens with pornography and how it is a one of the central forms leading to sex trafficking, to child sex trafficking. And how, the globalist stuff also use this to corrupt the minds of young people. I mean, the average age of someone looking at pornographic material, age 11, it's like staggering. I mean, your generation, I don't know what generation you are exactly, but I know my dad's generation, he's 47. And he's like, when I was, a teenager, you could not access this stuff unless you got a magazine or a CD or something. You could not access pornography. And if you did, everybody would know about it. But now it's just, you look it up online and there it is. So it's really tragic what we're fighting, but that's why I encourage everyone to go get the book Last Chance to Save Our Republic, because education is key. I mean, Thomas Jefferson said the best defense, or actually might have been Ben Franklin. Thomas Jefferson, I think, said this, but the best defense against tyranny is an educated society. Is a well-informed citizenry is a best defense against tyranny. So,
well, you've brought up two two subjects which I think are very important to discuss. And of course, one of those is the whole abortion issue. Uh, you know, you mentioned the fact, and I think people really need to understand that Margaret Sanger was a racist. There are pictures of her with the KKK in their hoods and their gowns, and she was an advocate of racial purity. When she found uh, those abortion centers, where are they located? Most of them, they're located in black neighborhoods because she was a racist. She wanted to stop black people from having children. So that was what this was whole about. She was the queen of the KKK and of racial purity. So she is very, very guilty of one of the most immoral things that we have ever done in this country, and that's, I'm very glad you mentioned it.
Yep.
Abortion is the murder of a living being. And I want to just diverge just for a moment. You know, Roe versus Wade. If you read it, most of the decision is based upon the justices discussing when does life begin, and they settled on this concept of quickening, which comes from British law back from the 1800s. But we now have a different knowledge of that. We have science, we have medical science, which understands DNA. This is very, very simple. Okay. You have a cell with 26 chromosomes that are made up. Half of the DNA comes from the mother, half of the DNA comes from the father. When the sperm and the egg come together, the DNA in that egg, that single cell that is formed, is unique. You and I have different DNA. There's no other person, unless you have an identical twin, there's no other person on earth that has the same DNA that you do. So when the sperm and the egg come together and they form a single cell, the DNA in that cell is a unique person. And so it is a medical fact that life does begin at conception. That's medically correct to believe that. It has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with medical science. So what we basically are talking about in abortion is at what point and by whom and for what reasons can you kill a human being? That's what it comes down to. It's no different than discussing the death penalty, whether you agree with the death penalty or not. I'm 100% against abortion because I think it's immoral. You're killing a person. I'm against the death penalty as well because it is up to God to decide when you become alive and when you become dead. So I don't believe it's up to me. The only time I can kill someone is in self-defense or the defense of my family. And I feel very strongly about that. But when it comes to abortion, it was devised out of a desire for racism, and it involves killing of a person.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, we can obviously get into the death penalty argument another day, but I will say this. I believe there are two different definitions for killing and murdering. I believe murder is
Yep.
taking an innocent life and killing is to defend one's life, or for the rightful, if someone were to do a heinous crime like as touching a child inappropriately or molesting, raping a young girl, I believe that's to if you were to have the death penalty for that person, I believe that's killing them. And they're not an innocent person anymore. And obviously, I do believe in forgiveness, but you see in Scripture where it says in the New Testament that if someone harms or causes one of my little ones to stumble, that's in the book of Matthew. It is better for them to have a millstone tied around their neck and to be thrown into the depths of the sea. So I do believe that molesting or touching an innocent child is probably one of the most heinous, vile criminal activity you could possibly do. So as it pertains to the death penalty, I am for the death penalty for pedophiles, and I think that's a crime that's rampant across our culture. In some of the most prestigious jobs, I mean, now you're seeing all these lawyers, CPS workers, politicians come out, and they are pedophiles. And that's obviously it's for another discussion. But I want to get to abortion real quick because Margaret Sanger, I think so often we talk about abortion, but we don't really talk about the history of abortion, the history of Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood. which is a very eugenics background. So Margaret Sanger coined the phrase birth control in 1914, but she really got a lot of the emphasis on her work, as she was a proclaimed eugenicist in all of her writings, in almost all of her writings. She showed up to the meetings and rallies. Hitler actually praised her for her work and said that it was very valuable, and really just admired her work here in America. And she ended up going to Eastern Europe and traveling across the world, trying to get her message of birth control and liberation, as we see throughout communist and totalitarian countries, where they are trying to convince the people that in order to be liberated, you need to accept this idea or this ideology. But I really believe, and I talk about this in the chapter of abortion. So before Margaret Sanger, you had, Darwinism, you had Karl Marx, and then before that, even into the 1700s, you have this man named Thomas Malthus, and it was a little bit different. His was more on population control, and he wrote the book, an essay on the principle of population control. And so while population control and eugenics are a little bit different, and we can get into that another day, it's the same principle, right? And it's the same. At the end of it is inherently evil, and it's about controlling, God's order and God's perfect plan for mankind. But Margaret Sanger, proclaims herself as eugenicist, comes out with birth control, and I want to find this quote. I literally just read this on my show the other day, because someone told me, they said, Hannah, Planned Parenthood's horrible, but at least they provide birth control, which helps to save women's lives. And a lot of people think this is controversial, but I am 100% against the pill birth control, because, Margaret Sanger came out with that. But actually, this is what she said. She goes, eugenics, this is out of Margaret Sanger's words. She says, eugenics without birth control seems to us a house built upon the sands. So, I mean, birth control was the first initial thing that she introduced to whip out her plan of eliminating what she deemed as the unfit of the population. And she said that was the Black community. And she said, I'm going to get my message out. I'm going to use the mission of eugenics and birth control and abortion. I'm going to eliminate the Black community through getting Black pastors to promote my message. She said that in most of her books. She proclaimed that. We look at this, the history, and then she moves into the Planned Parenthood Federation and all of her different organizations. And then you see Betty Friedman, who locks arms with her, and they really push out the sexual revolution and the feminist movement. But today, here we are in 2025, where people are still bringing up, they think, oh, Planned Parenthood has disassociated themselves from Margaret Sanger. Well, they can say that all they want, but they gave out the Margaret Sanger Award until 2015 and 2016, because then people started to catch on that, oh my word, this really is eugenics. They have a horrible history. They need to get away from this. And so, of course, Planned Parenthood quickly disassociated themselves, but the mission still remains, because they're still killing babies. Every single Planned Parenthood is placed primarily in minority areas. The largest Planned Parenthood is put in the projects. The largest Planned Parenthood in the United States of America is placed in the projects. So very strategic. The agenda has not changed, but this is a common thing that I hear. And it's like, do you realize how how eugenicist of a statement that could be? And people will say, well, Hannah, what about cases of rape and incest, which is less than 2%, less than 1% of abortion, right? But anyways, they'll say, Hannah, what about cases of rape and incest, where a baby is conceived through rape? Do you think that baby is going to live a good life? Like, it's going to, it's conceived through rape. It's going to have a horrible life. The mother was not financially ready or physically ready to help that child, so it should just be aborted. And I tell them, I say, I think what you should say, what you just said, I think you should listen to yourself say that, because it's a very, very dangerous statement to make. Because it's the same kind of rhetoric that Margaret Sanger used, in that if we want to make our society better, or if people want to be financially stable, they should just abort their children. That's eugenics, determining when a child is fit, whether or not their location, their gender, their identity, all of these things. Like, that's eugenics. That's at the root of eugenics. And so I think we often are like, oh, we've disassociated ourselves from Margaret Sanger, but we still use the same rhetoric. It's the same mission, the same goal. And at the end of the day, we do know that life begins at conception. We are the most technologically advanced age in human history. We understand that the heartbeat, we can detect it from 4 to 6 weeks, depending on each baby in its mother's womb. If you kill a pregnant woman, that's double homicide. But if you, abort the baby in its mother's womb, that's just fine. But I also think it's important for people to understand the argument of, oh, well, the woman has that right to choose. I was in an argument the other day with these girls. They were exchange students from Germany and Poland. And I don't mean to ag this on, but I just want to mention this one last thing. These girls were from Poland and Germany. And I was like, oh, I was just curious. Are you for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? And they said, oh, well, we're for Kamala Harris. And if we could vote in America. And I said, oh, why are you for Kamala Harris? And they said, well, she's for women's rights. And I was like, oh, what rights? Like, what rights is she for? I'm just curious. And they said, oh, like a woman's right to choose, a woman's right to choose. And I was like, oh, what's the woman's, what is she choosing? What's the woman's right to choose? What does that mean? And I was just trying to, pry it out of them. And they're like, oh, abortion. And I'm like, oh, what's abortion? And they're like, it's basically, where the mom terminates the baby. And I'm like, oh, so what you're saying is, it's the woman's right to choose. If she doesn't feel up to having her baby, what she can do is she goes to the doctor and they give her a pill that suffocates and starves their child until it dies. Or the abortionist goes in and it pulls each limb out limb by limb and then crushes its skull and sucks it out with a vacuum. And, it's fine because it's a woman's right to choose. That's what you support. And they're just like, what? And because they don't know. It's just like, oh, women's right to choose, terminate the baby. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, this is what abortion is. This is what you support. And you're like, oh, that's too graphic. Oh, explain to me how the act of abortion, the act of abortion and the abortion itself is safe and normal. It's a woman's right to choose. It's beautiful. It's, her right. But then the pictures and the imagery and the words, it's violent and inappropriate. Explain that. So.
Well, the point is, when a woman says, I have the right to do what I want with my body, I say, you absolutely do. The problem is, you are carrying in your womb is not your body. It's a separate individual. You do not have the right to terminate the life of that individual. The Greeks, they were able, when they had a child they didn't want, they were able to kill it up to 5 weeks after birth. And one of the architects of Obamacare, Peter Singer, wrote a book that was called "Should the Baby Live?" And in that he advocated infanticide up until the age of 5 weeks. That if you had a baby and you didn't think he was going to be any good, or you didn't know what was going to happen, you didn't like it, that you should have the right to commit what he called post-birth abortion. That's how far some of those people have gone. And of course, that is absolute murder. But the point is, to me, and I think we both agree, that abortion is murder, whether it's in the womb or after the baby comes out. It's the same thing. You are killing an individual who is alive and who is a unique individual by the fact they have unique DNA.
Yep. No, exactly. That's exactly right. Yep. And my dad always says, that the woman's right or the woman's body, that argument is out the window. And they still bring it up, but it's like, we've already proven to you, it's not your body. It's, another set of DNA, unique genome. It's separate, completely separate from your body. This is another being inside you. And I'll say, reproductive health care, reproductive rights, reproductive freedom, which is so interesting because you do have reproductive freedom. You look at the term reproductive, that's reproduce. You have the freedom to enter the bedroom or to choose to live or to be abstinent until marriage. You have that choice. You have that freedom. But once that baby is conceived, that is no longer your body. You now have the obligation to take care of it. And to, if you are not financially stable and you made a mistake, like there's adoption, there's plenty of families out there that want to have kids, that want to have a child, but can't. And are happy and willing to adopt your child. So it's all a lie. Again, and they love to use that 1%, the 1% of abortions for their entire argument. That's what they love to do that. But then also they say the life of the mother, which is also a very, very, very slim percentage. But here's the thing. That argument is so flawed because they say, well, you just want the woman to die. You don't even care about them. In an abortion and in an early delivery, an induced delivery, the baby still has to be delivered either way, through abortion or through an early delivery. It still has to be delivered. So why not let's choose the life-saving option for both the baby and the mother? Why would we choose the deathly option? That's not only the mother's life is at risk, but we're just going to go ahead and murder the baby because we just don't see any point of trying to keep it alive. But if we try the life-saving option, if we just do an early delivery and the baby survives, it's amazing. We saved a life. But if it didn't, we tried.
Well, medical science is so good now that they're able to save babies earlier and earlier and earlier. Uh, there is no excuse, really no excuse for saying, well, we will sacrifice the child for any reason. There's just no reason to even think in those terms. Uh, so there are unfortunately some instances in terms of injuries, maybe an automobile injury, where you do have to choose in a certain sense. But those are, again, like you said, tiny, tiny percentages, not even worth considering in the overall picture.
Yep, exactly.
So, what else in your book? I mean, there's one chapter we haven't talked, shall not be infringed. What about it?
Yeah, so the Second Amendment of the United States of America, Second Amendment, it's very important, shall not be infringed. I think it's one that we kind of put to the back burner, and if we mention our Second Amendment, the rhetoric around it is pretty soft, and we don't really talk about the importance of our Second Amendment rights. I know there was 10 million gun owners in America leading up to the election. 10 million were not registered to vote, which is insanity because I know plenty of hunters, plenty of gun owners that are conservative, but just don't feel the need to go out there and cast their vote to protect their right. And they say, oh, I'm not letting the government take my right away. And it's like that's not how it's, you can think that all day long, but shame on you when you have the ability to protect your right. You refuse to do so because you thought, oh, me goody two shoe, I'm just gonna, protect myself when the government comes. Horrible argument to make. But anyways, the history of our Second Amendment, very core amendment, very again, natural law. God gave this right for us to defend our families from a tyrannical government. And our Second Amendment that our founding fathers put into our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, it's not there for us to go have a nice time at the range with our friends or even go hunting. While those are great and I think valuable things, the main reason is for us to be able to defend our families in our country from a tyrannical government. God forbid it ever gets to that point. That is why our Second Amendment is there. And you look throughout communist countries, communist tyrannical regimes, Mao Zedong, under Mao's Cultural Revolution, said in his own words that if the Communist Party wants to have control over the people, they must have power over the barrel, meaning the gun. Lenin and Stalin both said that if they want to have control over its citizens, over the people, they must begin by disarming them. And so then, even in the book, I don't know if you saw that, but I had a ton of quotes from all these communist Democrats and even leaders in our country today that talk about how a gun isn't needed. How dare anyone own an AR-15? All of these things. But then and then you bring up the mass shootings and you look at gun safety. So they want to bring in their gun control rhetoric to when these mass shootings happen. Where do mass shootings happen? Where do 96% of mass shootings happen? They happen in gun-free zones. Predators do not go where they know there's going to be a bunch of rednecks carrying firearms. They go where they know they can prey on the weak. And it's a very common sense idea. You don't have to be a rocket scientist or, some kind of research analysis to understand that. It's just common sense. And you hear, people say, oh, well, you just don't care about people. You don't care about young people. That's why you don't want gun control. But here's my thing is because, you saw that CEO of United Healthcare, you saw when he was assassinated, you saw when President Trump was almost assassinated. I heard no ploys from the Democrats about gun control. I heard nothing in the media about how we need gun control. So I say these people aren't for safety. They're not for protecting children or, necessarily for gun control. These are anti-self-defense individuals. Because it's not necessarily just about gun control. They'll move on to something else. Just like in England, in the United Kingdom, they went from guns to now they're banning knives. And even though in some little cities, they're trying to ban pepper spray. So this isn't necessarily just about gun control. This is about they do not want you to defend your family from them, from a tyrannical government. So again, another strategic thing, and I highly recommend people, again, getting the book, Last Chance to Save Our Republic, so they can educate themselves on the importance of our Second Amendment, why we have it. And then I also break down things like red flag laws. Here in the state of Tennessee, Governor Bill Lee, great guy. But after the mass shooting at the Covenant Christian School in Nashville, Tennessee, he decided it was a good idea to impose red flag laws onto Tennesseans. Horrible, absolutely unconstitutional. The premise of red flag laws is that if someone down the street is offended because I'm carrying my firearm outside or jogging with my firearm, if they feel offended or threatened, under red flag laws, the police or the state can take my guns away because my neighbor was offended. So completely unconstitutional. There's no basis for common sense or principle in red flag laws, and people should be very careful. I mean, even background checks. There's lots of layers to break through that, but I'm just going to leave it there in that educate yourself on your Second Amendment, why we need to protect it, and why it's so important.
A couple comments on that. Of course, Adolf Hitler himself said if you want to control a nation, you must first disarm its people. And you mentioned that. Well, most dictators will do that. Because if you're a dictator, the last thing you want is a bunch of people who don't like you who are able to kill you with their own guns. So it's really essential for a dictatorship to disarm the people. And every single dictator in history has done exactly that. Because once your people are defenseless, you can do with them whatever you want. Red flag laws are especially disturbing to me. And it's one of the things that dictatorships also do is they want to turn the country into a tattletale country. Not just about guns, but what people say. Because you know that in Russia, if a neighbor hears you say something again in the old USSR, maybe even today, but if the neighbor heard you say something against the communist regime or the Communist Party, the next thing you would have, she would report you, and there'd be a knock on your door at 2 a.m., and you would be never heard from again. That's why we have a Bill of Rights, and that's so important. Read those Bill of Rights. It deals with what are your protections against a tyrannical government. That's what the Bill of Rights is. Every single one of those rights in the Bill of Rights says, this is what the government cannot do to you. That's why you should protect those Bill of Rights. You got to know them and know what your protections are. So, Hannah, let's talk about a couple things that we haven't touched on, something in general. What do you think really is the greatest issue, the greatest threat facing our nation today?
Absolutely. Well, then the last chapter, I guess it's the chapter before last because I gave a call to Gen Z at the end. But one of the last chapters towards the end is the greatest issue I believe facing our country, and that is the breakdown of the family unit between one man and one woman. And you talk about all these issues we've talked about today: globalism, the infringement on our Second Amendment, feminism, abortion. And it's like, how do we get to a point where we are even fighting these issues? And I believe it's because of weak men and emotional women. I mean, you look at the Garden of Eden. Why did Adam and Eve fall? Why did they sin in the garden? It's because Adam wasn't being the leader. He was not protecting, he was not guarding Eve's heart like God had called him to be. And Eve was basing her decision to eat the fruit off of emotion. Oh, I'm going to be more powerful than God. I'm going to be like God. So let me just eat this fruit. Same problems that we are facing today in the United States, in our world, not just in America, but in our world, is weak men being cowards, men being weak, not standing up, saying something, not standing up, protecting the innocent and the most vulnerable, and women being emotional, voting for a Democrat because they think that they're going to protect their rights or their right to reproductive freedom, all on emotion. 76% of women voted Democrat in 2020, 58% of men voted Republican. Same problems that we are facing today. So I really believe I break that down a lot further in why I believe it's the greatest issue facing our country in that chapter, and the science behind why a country is going to thrive more so with a strong family. I mean, they've done plenty of studies showing that the more married parent families per state, the stronger that economy is, the lower child poverty rate, the higher family median income. I mean, it's the economies are just booming because that's the way God had designed it to be. And so when we as a society, as a nation, remove and reject God's perfect order for mankind and kind of confuse it, that's when we're going to see the consequences. And that's why we're seeing, we're reaping those consequences right now.
So the family obviously is very important. And you know that was the plan, part of the plan of the Communist Party USA to destroy America from within. They wanted to destroy the American family through easy divorce, through promiscuity and pornography. They wanted to destroy our economic system, our economic power through the EPA and all those rules that would cut down our ability to earn a living. And they wanted to destroy marriage as well, because they understood that the nuclear family raised children properly to respect a certain standard of morality that is absent when you don't have a two-parent family. So that really is part of the overall plan to destroy the family unit. It is definitely missing in this country today. Percentage of out-of-wedlock babies is now, but I know it's more than 50%, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I saw this statistic the other day talking about abortion, and we could talk about this for hours, but and there's so much more that in the book that we could break down. But what was I gonna say? Abortion. I mean, literally, I just looked this up the other day. I think it's 7%, less than 7% of abortions are from married families. I actually think it's less than that. Less than actually, you know what? I think it's less than 3% of abortions are for married women. 90 to 97% are of married women, unmarried women. So, I mean, the solution to abortion, the solution to unplanned quote unquote pregnancies is abstinence and falling in and respecting God's word and understanding that, again, when we fall out of his order and his purpose for mankind, there's going to be consequences. And you mentioned, I mean, you look throughout communist countries, you look throughout histories, the two lines of attacks to control and deceive a nation is to collapse religion, to remove morality, and to number two, break down the family unit, destabilize the family. And that's what they're doing right now in America. But there's hope for sure with this generation. I give a call to action, a message to Gen Z. And I kind of relay it back to William Bradford, who was one of the key leaders, the prominent leaders of our religious freedom that we experience today in America. He came over from England on the Mayflower. He played a huge role in a lot of the founding documents as well. But at 16 years old, he had a decision that would change his life, and it was to be rejected by his family and come to America and fight for religious freedom, or to, or I guess I actually explained it, to be rejected by his family, come to America, or to choose Christ and to choose to fight for religious freedom. And he chose Christ and he chose to fight for religious freedom. And so I kind of echo, he's really an inspiration to me, because as I was writing the book, I was 16 and he was 16 as well. And so I encourage, my generation and the generations coming forward, to be like Daniel in the Bible. And he was in, the fire, and he still was standing on biblical truth, on principle, and to be Esther's and William Bradford's, that no matter how hard the persecution gets, to continue standing on basic truth. Because, I mean, Ronald Reagan said, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. It isn't passed down through the bloodstream, must be fought for, protected, and handed on to the next generation to do the same. So my message is, if we aren't willing to fight for freedom, if we aren't willing to fight for the next generations, then who will? Who will fight for the next generation? So we got a lot to work on, lots of exciting stuff, but I'm excited for the future, and I really appreciate what you're doing, Dr. Dan.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing, and I want to close with a quote from your book, and that is, "In a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act, and you are not guilty. You are to be praised and blessed for telling the truth. It is a revolutionary act in our time, and you have taken that step, and I'm very, very proud to have you as a guest on Freedom Forum Radio. That book is miraculous. It's wonderful. I tell everyone listening, you have to go buy this book. I will show it to you again here. I don't know if you can see it. There it is. You already showed it yourself, Hannah, but it is Last Chance to Save Our Republic by Hannah Faulkner. Please go and buy this book. Support Hannah. She has spent hours of her time, which is miraculous as well. She spent hours of her time writing a very fine book. So you are to be congratulated for telling the truth and being a revolutionary woman. And thank you very much for being a guest on live Freedom Forum Radio. God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. God bless.